Welcome to Season 2 of the Shop Stool Podcast, a podcast for woodworkers and the maker community in general. With Joey Chalk from King Post Timberworks, Bryan Cush from Sawdust Bureau, and Robin Lewis from RobinLewisMakes. Hi everyone, I hope you're all very well. This is episode 23, Season 2 of the Shop Stool Podcast. As always, I want to start by introducing my... Actually, no, we don't. We've only got one co-host, unfortunately, today. Unfortunately, Joey couldn't make the show today, but that's all right. I'm sure Bryan can fill both those shoes. Bryan, how are you today?
Oh, they're big shoes to fill. I'm good. I'm good, Robin. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad, thanks. My name is Robin Lewis. Welcome to the show, everyone. So today we've got another guest. We are talking with a knife maker, a skill that we haven't had on the show before. He's based in Melbourne, and he has, honestly, the cleanest Instagram feed you have ever seen. There's a quote on the website that says, to stay true to ideals of handmade, all our products are sole authorship, which is something that I really want to get into. It's a detail that I'm really interested in. He's the founder of Cutthroat Knives. Welcome to the show, Aidan Mackinnon. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm good, guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
I say, it's the first knife maker we've had, so we are, I guess, interested, and I'm just very keen to hear what makes a knife maker. We were getting into this a little bit before we started recording, so hopefully we can pick up on that. But what really makes a knife maker. But I think a good place to start, your origin story. How did you go from making your first knife to now having a very successful business?
So I used to work in a completely different field. I trained in international aid and development. I worked overseas in Geneva and New York and then Malaysia. And I came back to Australia right when Tony Abbott, who was a right-wing politician, came into power, and he defunded pretty much all the sectors that I could have found a job in. And so I was looking for work, and at the same time just feeling incredibly low because I couldn't find work. And so I was making stuff with my hands or cooking a lot just to fill the time, because there is literally a limit to how many job applications you can send out every single week. And at one point I had my name down with another knife maker that I was like, hey, look, I'm cooking a lot. I'm going to get a knife made by this other guy. And my parents were like, oh, you're getting a handmade knife. We ran into this other knife maker in Ballarat, a guy called Adam Parker. And he runs classes. Do you want to learn how to make a knife? And I went out with Adam Parker to his shed. And I was like, Adam, I want to make a chef's knife. And Adam was like, we're not going to make a chef's knife, we're going to make a hunting knife. And so we made a hunting knife together. And I don't hunt, I don't care about hunting, I don't have anything against hunting, it's just not my thing. But the process of making something immediately connected with me. And within 6 months, I'd bought everything that I needed to start making, and then I spent 6 months in a shared makerspace, doing nothing else but making. I was there 11 hours a day, just pushing myself, trying to make knives, trying to learn this kind of stuff. And back when I was starting, to buy material, you would go onto a website, download a PDF from a gas company's website, where the guy who was working at that gas company was also importing steel and selling the steel to other knife makers. Like there just was nothing. There were no websites to go, I'm going to buy knife steel and I'm going to buy handle material and so on. It was
knifemakers.com.
You need to find all of the intrinsic parts of this, and they're all separate and they're all in different places, and none of it is a specific website. All of that's changed, which is fantastic. I love it that it's changed, because I think it makes better knife makers. I think I'm against gatekeeping within communities. The more difficult it is, doesn't mean it makes you a better knife maker. It means that it makes the community a smaller community, and makes the community worse knife makers as a community. So I'm in support of that shift that's happened. But launched, and then within 3 months got some big write-ups, and in the beginning, I think it's probably the same as you guys. You launched this crazy idea of going, I'm going to be a knife maker, and you're like, that it is an insane idea to think of. These days there are more knife makers doing it, but back then there was, you typed in handmade knives Australia when I launched, and US websites came up before Australian websites. And so to launch this, I was like, look, I'll just do it, but I'll be looking for other work on the side. And when that other work comes in, I'll just drop the knife making. And then it switched over, and very quickly I was like, oh, this can actually be my income. This can actually be my living.
Can I ask, Aidan, that timeline, so you mentioned Tony Abbott, but for people that don't know their right-wing Australian history, how long has that period been since you first made that hunting knife?
It's been... The business is a little over 5 years old. So it was 5 years old in April of this year, so 2020. And then it was about six to 8 months before that I was just kind of
learning from whoever
I could. So I did a class with Adam Parker and another class with Thawa Valley Forge. Both of them kind of have their different kind of focuses, but that was the only way to learn at that time. And there was a couple of guys putting stuff out on YouTube, but there was also that problem of there was so much information, and when you're first starting out, it's just white noise, and you don't know how to tell the difference between the guy who's talking truth and the guy who's talking at his ass. And unfortunately, that became, that was just trial and error of going, I'll follow what this person's saying. And for 3 or 4 months, you're following what that person's saying, not knowing that what that person's saying has got no bearing on reality.
It's total garbage, yeah.
Yeah, it's total garbage. They gave you the wrong advice, they got the wrong advice before them, and you were making bad product because of it. And I think what's interesting, and it might be the same with some furniture, is that with a knife it can look like a knife, but it can also not perform like a knife. So you can make an object that looks exactly,
it can photograph fine, but
it can photograph fine
when it's in your
but
hand.
You're like, it can't cut to save its life, or the heat treatment is bad. Like, there's all these hidden elements to what makes a great knife. So the heat treatment is, the heart and soul of good knife making. But you can totally half-ass that and make something that looks fine, but just performs terribly, and no one would know until it's in that person's hands.
Yeah.
Can you tell us the initial steps? So when you established yourself as a business, did you have a load of a backlog of orders of products that you had made for friends and family? So you had photographed them and stuck them up on a website and got orders, or did you go through the kind of design marketing exhibition route, or did you specifically target people with ads, or how did you get those first clients?
I did a lot of the design markets in the beginning. I think there's something really valuable. Friends and family are never going to give you the feedback that you need. And even if you go, people are like, you should make a knife and give it to a chef. Tell you what, chefs actually don't know that much about knives. And I tell you what, if you give them a free knife, they're not about to rag on you if you give them a free product. The best place is to go out into public and have people pick up your product and say, this is good or this is bad. Because they have there's nothing in it for them to not hold back. And then the other part of it is take your product to someone who's very knowledgeable and say, go to in the case of knife making, you would find somebody who's a master smith, and you go to them and say, please give me feedback on this. And again, they're going, look, I'm going to give you feedback on the aesthetics of what you're doing, and here's feedback on that. And I also brought in Sean McIntyre, who's one of Australia's only master smiths, and I got him to come in for a couple of days. I paid him to come in a couple of days and to go through my processes and give me feedback on each process about what I was doing right and what I was doing wrong. Because, again, you can make an aesthetically good-looking product, but maybe all the joinery that you're using, if you're a furniture maker or as a knife maker, maybe all the intrinsic parts of what you're doing are all wrong, but it all looks nice. And you can just hide it.
Yeah. And I guess you've just going through a lot of the details on your website, you've come from a cooking background. You really enjoy cooking. So you've got that, well, it sounds like it anyway. So you've got that, you know what you want as someone who enjoys cooking. You want X, Y, Z. So you're going to have a much better understanding of what you're trying to achieve from the knife than someone like myself who was, you know, if I could take a pill and that'd be it for the day, I'd be a happy man. So you've got that.
You're the Soylent Green of cooking.
I am. Give it to me in a jug, and I'm happy.
Just give me ground up humans. Yeah.
So you're coming from a very experienced, or you've got that background knowledge, which I guess is going to influence what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Like people ask me like, oh, you know, where do your designs come from or whatever. I'm like, I mostly just make the knives I want to make. And that's born out of how I use the product and how I engage with it. But even when I'm designing a new product, say a boning knife or a fish filleting knife that I'm working on at the moment, these often take more than a year to develop. So my fish filleting knife, I sit down and I watch videos of people filleting fish. Just videos of people cutting up fish and how they use that knife. Because then you go, well, how they use it is like this. They're cutting on a certain angle, they're holding the handle in a certain way, and the way they use it needs to influence the design. I notice a lot of makers do stuff and you're like, that's aesthetically beautiful, but I can tell that that's just going to feel garbage. It's going to feel terrible. And I think good design has to be something you want to engage with. I think Bryan does it with his chopping boards as well, the pixel chopping boards. A chopping board is ultimately quite a static object. It's something that sits on your kitchen bench and it has a weight that doesn't really move. But if it's beautiful, you kind of want to engage with it. You want to pick it up. You want to turn it over. You want to put wax on it regularly. And that makes, in my mind, that makes great design. It's something, and that's where design separates differently to art. Art is something that sits on a wall, and, you know, I'm going to be pissing off a lot of people who are far more into art.
Piss them off, God.
Yeah, but it's this thing that exists, and for the majority of art, it's not about an engagement.
Yeah, it's two-dimensional. It's not necessarily tactile.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's, you know, like there are always exceptions. So whatever you do, don't email me. Send all your emails to Robin. All your complaints about whatever I'm going to say. Don't
info at RobinLewisMakes.com.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the questions that I had going through a lot of the knives that you make, which your website's fantastic, by the way. It's just really nicely laid out, and the design is really great. And I can never remember this. There's a fancy word for it. The sides of the knife, the wood pieces.
The scales.
Scales, that's right. The scales that you get, the wood that you get. Where do you source that from?
So in the beginning, again, I was just buying slabs of wood. And then cutting it up and stabilising it myself and having to source all of this kind of stuff. Since then, you know, over the years, people have stepped into that area in a much larger way. And so these days I have a couple of dedicated suppliers, a couple in Australia and a couple in the US. And all these guys do is produce wooden handles, produce the blocks for either wooden handles or acrylic handles or combination handles, and they sell that kind of stuff. So in Australia, I've got a guy called Outback Timbers, and the benefit of working with those guys versus buying a stabilised piece of wood, a big slab of wood, is that these guys stabilise that wood for you. So stabilising is really, really important when it comes to knives, because the cross section of a handle is so thin. If I was to do it just as a natural piece of wood, even if it had been dried for 3 years, there are going to be intrinsic movement in that wood. Now, on a table, you're not going to notice that. It's too, the table is so large that you're never going to notice if it moves by a millimetre. But with a knife, that's all you're going to notice. And so what you have to do with knife handles is you've got to stabilise them. You put them into a resin bath and you vacuum out the air that's in the wood. And then when you turn off the vacuum, the resin pulls into the wood itself, and you use a heat-cured resin. And so then after that, you put it into the oven and that cures in there and that stabilises. All of that said, doesn't guarantee that wood is perfectly stabilised or that it will never move, but it massively reduces any movement of the wood while it's on the handle.
Yeah.
They're absolutely stunning, like the species of timber. I also, resin has had a bad name in furniture making for quite a while, mainly due to river tables. But for anybody who wants to see really good use of coloured resins, tinted resins, have a look at Aidan's Instagram. Have a look at Cutthroat's Instagram. It is absolutely stunning.
You've got that, it's that California... I can't remember the full name of it. Oh,
yeah, the Californian Buckeye Burl that I just posted up the other day. Yeah,
I mean, it doesn't even look like wood. It is such a foreign-looking material.
So this is the benefit of what stabilising does. So that wood, for a furniture maker, is garbage.
Yeah.
It wouldn't hold up to a nail. It is so soft. You could run a nail through it. You could chip the whole thing away with your fingers. And by stabilising, by impregnating it with resin, it still looks like wood, but it's as hard then as some of the Australian hard timbers. Probably not as hard as ironbark, which is, I reckon you could probably make a knife out of ironbark. But it definitely performs really, really well after that. And California, if somebody was to say to me, hey, you only get to make one knife for the rest of your life with one timber, it would probably be with Californian Buckeye Burl. I think it's such a special bit of wood, and I know that everybody's going to be like, but you should be making stuff with Australian woods. Yeah. I don't care. Shut up. Go away. Send all your complaints to Robin Lewis.
It's got this strange, almost wood to ivory transition, and obviously ivory is a popular knife handle. And that's what I just thought was so interesting about its colouring. It's just so unique.
Yeah, it takes on a lot of the spalting, which I always think again looks really special. It is one of the benefits of kind of making knives, because we're working on such a small area. What we get to the wood that we get to work with is just top notch. Like, so the cheapest wood that I put on my knives is $40 per handle.
I was going to ask you how expensive that resin vacuuming process is. But
yeah, and the most expensive I've bought of wood is about $200
for one
knife. For one hand, like for one knife. And so you're like, kind of after labour, the handle is the most expensive part.
That's a very expensive table if you're working on those.
Yeah, like can you imagine doing like a huge table where the per square inch calculation was like $10 per square inch.
That's crazy. Now I see you've got a team of people, which is quite interesting. So a lot of the people we talk to, it is just one man, or last week we talked to COC. They were two ladies. Do you one of your team on your website is a photographer? How does that relationship work? I mean, that's obviously not a full-time photographer, is it?
No, so this has been a really clear goal of mine from the beginning. I've always wanted to go, hey, I want to build up cutthroat knives, and I don't want it to just be me. There are a lot of other knife makers, and this is nothing against what they do, but it's, Bob Kramer knives, incredible work, but you're buying an artist's piece at that point. I wanted to specifically build a brand. And so I often refer to we, even though it's me making the knives. And also ultimately it is a team. I do have a photographer who takes all my work, and I find it easier to go, hey, here's the photographer who does everything, rather than having to tag her in every single picture. And then I've got the leather worker. At one point I was like, I'm going to do all the leather work myself. And then very, very quickly I was like, oh my God, leather work is a whole new set of skills that would require a lifetime of mastery. And so instead I brought in a leather worker and designed some stuff with her. Both of these people are essentially independent, but the amount that I kind of employ them, I'm probably about a quarter of their yearly income for both of them.
It's always so interesting to find out which makers are doing outsourcing of different things and how they really value their time and skill set. It's fascinating.
Because we tend to, especially at the beginning, we all start as I'm going to do everything, because that's what you have. That's all you have, exactly. And I remember Joey, when he tried to up his photography game for his website, and he started paying more attention to that, how that really improved his brand. But one of the big things that they always talk about when you're making a company is you have to outsource. You need a team, because you cannot do everything. And that's why it's so good to see that your team is doing the other bits. And I think it's a real big takeaway for anyone who's trying to start their business in what we do. I am a terrible photographer. I film my work and I make my furniture, but I suck at taking pictures of it. And if I want to do this properly, I need to get a photographer like you're doing to really take it to the next level.
It's the same as having accountants and bookkeepers as well. I did my tax the first year, and it took me 2 weeks to do my tax. One, because I'd kept no receipts. If the ATO's listening to this, I have all the receipts, I promise. They're somewhere. But I did this and I was like, if I do this for any more years than the first year, at one point I'm going to get audited and I'm going to be dead as a business. I very quickly, I was like, oh my God, I need to sort out this today. And so I got a bookkeeper and an accountant, and they set it all up for me. We can't be perfect at everything. It's not possible. You can be an amazing designer, but you might lack the photography skills or the website building skills. And it's totally okay to outsource this kind of stuff and to go, I'm going to focus where I need to focus.
Sorry, did you bring a graphic designer on board as well? Or how did you end up with such clean, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, identity in your brand?
I didn't.
You didn't?
I've always been dabbling with that kind of stuff. So, if you think about how you get from, we're the culmination of all our previous experiences. So at high school, I worked on the school magazine, and through that I started to get an understanding of Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Photoshop back when they were, this was a while ago, this was, Illustrator 2 and Photoshop 2.
When you were hand cranking the machine.
Exactly, and so it was, these were always things I kind of dabbled with, and I always liked branding, but they're also, we exist as rolling brands. It's not, I went to a branding company and go, hey, can you do this? I did it, and my brand built slowly over time, and so you find something that works with you. So I've found a good way to take photos of my knives that's quick. I've got a floor that works really well. I've got a floor that adds a fair bit of texture. I put it on the floor, and I can take a photo of that really quickly. But that took me a while to find that, and I was trying different things. And when you find that, you're like, okay, cool. Now I need to rejig my whole website to reflect this, so it's a clear and considered thing. But I also did something in the beginning that I recommend to a lot of people, which is sit down and write a branding and marketing guideline for your business. And so it's having that as a useful document to kind of go, okay, what are the fonts that we use on our brand? What are the fonts that we're using on our website? What is our logo fonts? What are the colors of our brand? Here are the 5 colors. Okay. And I went through every different element of the brand about how I want to represent myself. And even things that were kind of future stuff, going, okay, when I build a workshop, what do I want that workshop to look like? And how is that workshop on brand for me for the future? And doing that, it's probably a 1 to 2 week full-time job to create that document, but it's so valuable because then when you're doing something, you're not going, I've got to keep this branding in my head. You're jumping straight in and are able to work from that from then on. You go, hey, look, I just turned to this. And also, if you work with somebody else, if I do a collaboration with Bryan, for example, we can sit down and go, okay, he's building me a table, but I want that table to be on brand. Here's my branding document. I can give it to him, and that can act as inspiration for Bryan to work off something.
I think it's really fascinating, some of the brands that you've collaborated with as well. Like I remember was it Rooftop Honey, or was it another honey brand?
Yeah, Rooftop Honey. Yeah,
it was Rooftop Honey, where you had the bee in the handle, a dead bee in the handle. Is that right?
Yeah. So. Yeah. I will preface this by saying the bee was dead before I got the bee.
You're not murdering bees.
I had hate mail. People go,
you did not.
You're killing the bees. And I'm like, dead bees are a byproduct of honey production.
Yeah.
And we got dead bees.
Yeah.
It's you have these kind of visions. So the first collaboration I did was with North Street Botanical. They're a florist, and I've always just kind of really found her work inspiring. And so we're like, let's put a flower in resin. And you do that, and you're like, well, what else can we put?
What else can I do
in resin? And then you're like, okay, let's do a bee. And I, in my space, I was really fortunate to have access to another maker who works with resin, and I was able to skip a whole bunch of knowledge because I was able to talk to him, and we decided to do this. Let's put bees in resin. But the resin that I use for knife handles is polyurethane. It's quite an expensive resin. It has a really short cure time, but it reacts with moisture. And it took us 6 months. We were like, this will be really easy. We'll just put the bee in the resin and it'll work. And it took us 6 months of experimenting to work out a way of doing it where the bee didn't explode.
Wow.
And we had to study taxidermy. And we were like, well, maybe we have to vacuum in ethanol into the bee and then cook off the ethanol. Because there's moisture, even a dead bee that's dried still has inherent moisture, and the polyurethane resin that we're using is reacting to the moisture in the bee, and it's exploding. And so we had to vacuum in ethanol into the bee, which was displacing the water, and then we would cook off the ethanol at 80 degrees, and then as soon as it was finished cooking, it would go straight into the polyurethane resin, which has a 15-minute cure time. And that would go first into a vacuum chamber before going into a pressure pot. And so you're moving ridiculously fast for a knife that I think we sold for, $700. Our pricing was just so low at the time. I say $700 and people who are going, oh, but a global knife is $100. You're like, yeah, but there was 6 months worth of work to make that first handle.
Global don't have to deal with exploding bees.
Yeah.
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 Exactly.
R&D.
the R&D that went into that first, like, I made no money on that. If you really look at that, you're like, I made no money.
It was a real passion piece.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think the first piece that I saw of yours was when I met you at the Melbourne Design Awards, when you won the gold for Blood Money, was it?
Yeah.
With the dollar bills.
I don't get to claim that one. That was there was a maker in the States called Workman, WKRMN. He's amazing. He's a really, really fantastic knife maker / just maker. He makes a whole bunch of different things, and he makes resin blocks of Blood Money. And I saw that,
coolest looking thing.
I'm like, brilliant, such a cool thing. And then so I bought a whole bunch of that, and that's actually when I had an employee, Rez. And so Rez had been working with me for a year, and after that year I was like, look, you've been producing for a year, you get to make your own limited edition now, and you can do whatever you want, and I'll facilitate that. And so I don't get to claim that one, but he was like, I'm going to use that stack of Blood Money blocks that you've got sitting on your shelf. And I'm like, cool, go for it, man.
Amazing.
Go wild.
That's what we were talking about just before the show started, about what makes you what gives you that title of artisan. And so that knife with the exploding bee, which is what it's going to be called from now until eternity, is such a good example of that, where at face value it's just a knife, but the background in it is so amazing. As someone who spends a lot of time on YouTube, I find myself, as someone who makes YouTube videos, I spend a lot of time on YouTube. And when I'm looking through a video that I want to watch, if I see a standard coffee table, standard chair, there's so little value in that. I mean, in the beginning, it's fantastic, but then as you start to mature and get better, what I'm looking for is the guy who's, I don't know, made a chair out of feathers. Because the amount of work and craft in that's what's amazing, and that's where that real skill comes in.
Yeah, I think it's the same. I want to understand somebody's thought process that got them from the initial thought to the end product. And the more I understand that thought process and the development of that, the more attached I am to the object that they made at the end of it. So I know that we were talking about art before, but I actually buy a fair amount of art. I find art really inspiring. I have it on my walls. And I love people who have just really clear visions. And in terms of makers, there are plenty of people who can make a knife, who can forge out a blade and put on a handle on that thing. But I think what differentiates people is people who come into this and going, okay, I want to make something that represents X, and goes really down a pathway. I've just gone blank on the ones that I was trying to think about that would be really good examples of that. But there's a jewellery maker that I follow, a jeweller. That's a better way of framing that. A jeweller called Black Braille Atelier. Her name's Indigo, and she just does these beautiful rings. And they're not like anything I've ever seen before. They're kind of raw quartz and then folded silver into like roses around, that kind of stuff. They're just stunning. And it's that thing where you look at it and you're like, I know that there's thought that has gone into this. It's not just, hey, I'm going to put on legs, and it's a love of the building process. It's a love of the thought that goes into that moment before that the first thing is even put together.
Can I ask you from a novice perspective, and like, I love knives, I love the aesthetic of them. Can you explain the fetishization of Japanese knife making?
Oh,
what is it that they have one particular process that the rest of the world was sort of slow to catch up on? Is it the way they make their steel? Is it
I'm going to say some things that are going to put some people really offside. Okay?
Excellent.
You heard it here first, folks.
Okay. Japan is making some of the best factory-made knives in the world. I don't understand the fetishization of Japanese knives. I find it a bit gross. There's a term in Japanese called nipputaku, which means it's a white person who's more into Japanese culture than Japanese people. And I think there's an element of that.
Is that Avril Lavigne, no?
Yeah, well, I think there's, at every market I go to, one person will come up to me and lecture me about how Japanese knives are the best in the world. And you're like, maybe, probably not. If you're talking about swords, for example, everybody goes, oh, the katana, it's this, beautifully well-made sword. You talk to professional sword makers, and professional sword makers are expert historians as well. They will know everything about the history of sword making as a craft. So I spoke to a guy called Mackinnon, who's one of the best sword makers in the world. He's literally made swords for countries. So countries will go to him. The King of Jordan went to him and was like, I want 2 kurikuris made for the country of Jordan. And he made those.
Wow.
And the reality is that European swords will perform as good, if not better, than those than the Japanese swords of the same period. It wasn't like when the beginning of the Meiji Restoration happened, when Japan opened up to Europe, that Europeans went over there and bought swords and go, oh, we can learn so much about steel and knife making from this. They bought them as beautiful pieces, but they weren't like, oh God, they're so much more advanced than what we're producing.
They've been doing it this way? Why didn't we think of this?
Yeah. It's just bonkers. It's the same thing that happens with Damascus. Everybody comes up and they're like, oh, is this folded steel? If folded steel was vastly superior to everything else, we would literally make everything out of it. We've got the technology to make everything out of if Damascus was this wonder kid that everybody kind of presents it to be, we would just make everything out of that thing. But if you want to
give people a quick rundown on exactly what Damascus steel is, in a nutshell, your 30-second pitch.
Oh, I know that there's going to be a knife making boffin who's just going to lose their brains about all of this.
Anger them, that's fine.
Modern Damascus is pattern steel, so you'd get 2 different types of steel. So often it's a steel called 1075, another steel called 15N20, that have got slightly different content. So 15N20 has a little bit more of nickel, and you layer them up. So you do 1075, 15N20, 1075, 15N20. You layer them up, stack them, weld them together, and then compress them under heat.
How thin are those layers?
If I'm doing it, 1 to 2 mil each. So you make, a stack of, say, 30. You heat it up and then compress it down either with a hammer or with a forge press or a power hammer, and then draw that out. And through heat and through pressure, you actually forge those, you weld those that steel together. And then you can either layer it again, but the way you twist and contort that steel is going to bring out a pattern in the steel itself, because those 2 steels look slightly different. And then if you dip it in acid, or if you put it into coffee, the pattern's going to become more observable. And so when you look at Damascus, you're seeing 2 different steels that have been pattern welded together or forge welded together.
That's a pretty good summary.
So so that's modern Damascus. People are going to say, oh, but we've lost the true techniques to time, and I'd say you're wrong. Look at Woots, look at Bouillotte steel. There's a whole history behind all of this kind of stuff. But if Damascus it was so superior, what we would actually see is there are, in the States, getting bigger, cutting competitions where people make knives and they've got to go through essentially an obstacle course. You've probably seen some videos online of YouTube of this kind of stuff where they have to cut through a 2x4 in a certain amount of time, and then they've got to cut through a rope, and then they've got to cut. So there's a whole bunch of different things that they've got to do to a knife in a period of time as fast as possible. And so you're getting measured both on accuracy but also on speed. And those competitions are dominated by mono steels. So not by Damascus, not by pattern welded steels, where it would be two different types of steels. Mono steels, where it's one type. They're absolutely dominated by mono steels, which says something that the steels that humans are producing today are the best steels that humans have ever produced, bar none. So I'm a bit more modern about this stuff. I make some Damascus. I also buy some Damascus from different companies. But ultimately it's an aesthetic that you're buying with these kind of things. And that's really the truth with knives, and it's the truth with furniture as well. It's the truth with all kind of stuff we make. At the end of the day, since all knives cut food, what makes one knife better than another? And at a certain price point, it just doesn't matter. They're all going to cut to a level that you're going to find it pretty hard to differentiate as the average user between one knife and another knife. And so then at that point, what makes one knife better than another knife, or one piece of furniture better than another piece of furniture, is the story behind it. If that knife makes you feel better, makes you enjoy cooking more, makes you want to be in the kitchen, it is a much better knife. Now, maybe that's my knife, maybe that's the B knife that has some kind of connection to you if you're an apiarist, or maybe it's a piece of crap knife that your grandfather had for his whole life, an old sabatier that's jagged, that needs a good sharpen, but the history of that knife means more to you than anything else. I think as makers, we need to be making things that become heirlooms, that take on emotional meaning for people. That really should be our goal, is going, and that's also the most sustainable thing we can do, as makers. We can go, hey, here's this thing, and I'm producing it, hopefully that you hand it on to your grandkids.
I think that's a really tight idea that all makers need to get behind. It's a beautiful
way of phrasing it, because, as you say, at that price point, it's all grade A. It doesn't get grade A from there. Yeah, that's amazing. So, in terms of cutthroat knives, what is the next step? Is there a bright, interesting future ahead? What do you have in mind?
This year, it's just survive COVID-19, survive making.
I feel bad for asking the question.
Yeah, it's I've worked over the last 5 years to get it to where it was, and I definitely had hiccups. A couple of years ago, I nearly ran the whole business under. We weren't charging enough. I had two knife makers working under me, and it was just I nearly killed myself running that business. But it's kind of managed to survive all of that. So this year it's about getting through. I think as soon as COVID started, a good way to think about it was going, okay, I just need to redefine what my definition of success is. I had this definition of going, I'm going to sell this many knives, I'm going to run this many classes, I'm going to move into my new space, XXXXXX. And all of that went out the window. And my definition of success to this year was get through it, come out on the other side. But in terms of overall goals for what I would love to do, I would love to get the business to a point where I've got a full product offering. At the moment, it's knives and a little bit of leather, and every so often every couple of years we do chopping boards. I would love those to be permanent products in our range, as well as a number of cheaper products. We've got a magnetic knife board that I've been working on for a number of years. But each of these things takes time to make. it costs you $3,000 to make the first magnetic knife board. Every other one after that doesn't cost you that much, but the first one costs you thousands and thousands of dollars, and then all you're trying to do is recuperate the money from that first one. So I would love to have a flushed out offering, a full product offering. And I know that people go to the website and at the moment I'm sold out until next year for our knives and for the custom work. I would love to be able to have a couple more products on the website that people can go to and buy straight away, because I don't like it that they go to my website and they're disappointed, because our classes book out almost instantly and knives go really, really quickly. And yeah, I could easily just push up the price, but I want this stuff to still be accessible to people. I need to make a living from this, but I still want people to be able to go, hey, I can buy this.
It's that mixture of thing that, like, as opposed to having constant stock levels and somebody can just go and click and buy and it arrives the next day. I kind of find the same thing with my furniture, because I don't really keep stock and I make pieces to order. Somebody will go and ask, I want to buy this. And I said, right, okay, do you want any changes made to it? And just by saying you want changes to it, they attach to that product so much more, even if it's just changing a dimension or changing a timber species. But it just gives them their story in the piece.
Well, it's proven that is that people react to things better, even if they have a small choice in it. So if you're buying a car and you're like, I'm going to I'll get the black one versus the white one, having that choice is going to make you more connected to that end product. And yeah, you're trying to find this balance of going, here, here's this thing, but also I know that there's this whole market of people that I'm never tapping into, and that market are the people who are never going to wait on a waiting list for a knife. They want to be able to go to a website and they want to buy your knife, and if they can't buy it, they're going to go somewhere else, and I'm constantly missing out on that. I have a couple thousand people go to my website every week. I don't have a couple thousand sales every week.
I think we were talking about it before, about the idea of maybe having sub-brands and sort of something by Cutthroat and differentiating between your full-on bespoke knives and then something that is easily accessible to people to order. I think it's really interesting. I've been thinking about how I can bring that into my business, so it's an interesting conversation for people to have. Yeah,
and but also, how do you do that and stay true to what you
and just not pump out crap?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Turn into IKEA.
Exactly. Like I think there's something there, and I think there is a balance that can be struck. I think if you keep it in-house, and maybe you go, hey, look, the materials are slightly different, or the fit and finish is slightly different, or whatever. There are ways of adding in essentially sub-brands, but also you want that thing of going, it is still a Cutthroat Knives product, and that still has to mean something. You see it a lot with like chefs who obviously get sponsored by ScanPan or whatever, and so they're now hawking fry pans, and you're like, okay, you own a Michelin star restaurant and you're now hawking garbage pans. And I'm not saying ScanPan are garbage pans, but
ScanPan's lawyers will be in touch.
I know, it's just send all your complaints to Robin Lewis.
This is our last guest, Bryan. I'm tired of this abuse.
Can you maybe just, I know there's so many makers out there from different furniture makers and jewelry makers that are interested in knife making, and the fact that you've gone from learning from somebody else to now teaching it, can you just tell us a little bit about your classes? I know they book out very quickly, but what sort of pricing they are, how many classes it involves to make one knife?
So we generally do 2 classes a month. At the moment, it's because of the year, we had to cancel so many classes, or at least postpone so many classes. So we've got a lot of filling up to do. But it's $980 for 2 days. And during that 2 days, you make and design 2 kitchen knives from start to finish. I did because I did a couple of classes and learnt with some people before this. I've also got a background in adult education, so I've taught at universities. And so I wanted people walking out of this class going, I made this product. Because I definitely did some classes with some other people where you're like, that was fun watching that guy make that product. Now, that's not to say that that's a bad way of learning. At a certain level of proficiency, you learn way better watching somebody else make something. These days, when I go and train with people, I want to go and watch them make that product, and I want to watch how their body moves or whatever. I'm looking for very certain things. But when you're first starting out, in our 2-day course, you come in, you spend the first hour designing your 2 knives, and then from start to finish, we heat treat the knives, we learn about good heat treatment, we grind the knives, hand sand them, glue on the handles, and then shape the handles. And the only part that I really touch in those 2 days is I sharpen the knives for them at the very end.
Awesome. I'm in. I'll book in for 2021.
Yeah. So, I feel really bad at the moment because people are like, when can I book it? I'm like, I have 15 people who I owe classes to.
Yeah. There's a bit of a pandemic thing going around right now that is...
I had somebody contact me. He's like, "Oh, when are you bringing out some cheaper products?" I'm like, "Dude, there is a worldwide pandemic. I am focused on the things that guarantee get me income right now because I've had such a hit to my income."
Yeah. All right, so we're going to leave it there. We've done a good episode here. So, Aidan, just before we leave off, where can people find your stuff?
Sure. You can find me at www.cutthroatknives.com.au or on Instagram at Cutthroat Australia. Facebook, Facebook's the worst.
Yeah.
I keep it just for SEO.
Yeah.
But literally, if I get a message through Facebook, I will groan.
Yeah, as I said in the beginning of the episode, your Instagram feed it's polished. It looks so good. So yeah, from my perspective, I'd recommend to anyone go check out that Instagram page. Even if you just want to see what an Instagram page should look like, it's a good old look. All right, so to everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please go ahead and give it a rating on iTunes. That really helps us out. The Shop Stool Podcast is available on iTunes and most other podcast apps. My name is Robin Lewis. Bryan, thanks for hanging out today. Aidan, thank you once again for sharing your story. Very interesting. And we've got a number of quotes that I can see I'm going to be using to title this podcast. Now I've just got to pick the one that works best.
Not the one about ScanPan. Thanks so much, Aidan, for coming on. It's brilliant.
Hey, thanks so much, guys.
So take care, everyone, and we'll see you in the next show.
See ya.